I'm Oprah as a dude, and I love you all.
All right, here we go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Reyes Reflection podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. That's the way that we're going to grow. Word of mouth. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell anybody you know to go ahead and check out the Reyes Reflection podcast. And, of course, follow me on those socials at I'm Nathanael Reyes. Customarily, I have to talk about those partners. Jocko Fuel, clean fuel without compromise. Mad Rabbit, Tattoo Aftercare, Be Bold, Be You. SMACKIN sunflower seeds, and of course, my personal favorite, ARAVE cards. Get yourself going on your Pokemon card collection today. Now, today I have, as promised, the part 2 with my guest, Marci Marie. But for the benefit of the viewers that did not listen to the first one, I'll just give you a brief summary of who she is, and then we're going to pick up right where we left off from part 1. So I recommend that you listen to that one so you can hear the full extent of Marci's backstory and her life and all that she went through. Today I have with me a woman who has spent 10 years in a Texas prison. She has turned her life around and she has used those experiences for advocacy. She is also the co-host of the On the Rec Yard Women's Prison podcast, where she talks about the realities and the harsh stories of life behind bars. She also, on her social media platforms, is constantly talking about those stories and experiences, and she'll even answer some. So if you go ahead and leave in the comments, what was it like, blah, 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 she will answer you. So please feel free to check her out. Without further ado, Marci Marie, welcome back to the Reyes Reflection podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Of course. Thank you so much again for doing this. I know our schedules were busy. We were trying to make it work, but we finally did it, as promised. To the listeners and the viewers, we are going to do a part 2. So I want to pick up exactly where we left off from part 1, which is you met your wife in prison. And that's why I encourage all the listeners who did not listen to the first one to listen to the first one. I'm doing that on purpose. I'm not going to give you the backstory. That's how she left off part 1. So yes, you met your wife in prison. How are you able to find love in such a toxic and hellacious environment?
I did meet my wife in prison, and I think that people that are, I think there's a term called trauma bonded, and so there's something to that. We built relationships in there, Nathaniel. We built friendships in there. That harsh environment and being oppressed like that really drew our population together. The women that I was locked up with, regardless of demographics, race, age, like we were in it together. We formed like play families, we did that. So it's not that unusual, I think, to find a bond with someone. Now, I had a few girlfriends before I met my wife. She had come on the scene after I had been locked up about 6 years. And when I saw her, first of all, she's a little bit younger than me. But I was moving into a new dorm, and my best friend lived in that dorm. So when you're in there and you're getting moved, they just randomly move you at any time. But when you're going somewhere where you have good friends, it's kind of exciting. And I remember it was a cell block housing dorm, and I walk in and I'm like pulling the cart with my mattress and all my stuff. And I'm like, Erin, my friend, Erin. And here comes this other chick to her cell door, and she's like, Erin's not here. And I look at this girl, and of course I thought she was adorable. She's very, very cute, very pretty. And she's like, I'm like, who are you? And I had been on the unit for a minute, y'all. People knew me, I had lived everywhere. And she's like, who are you? And I remember thinking, oh, she's new. Like she doesn't. Anyway, that was kind of my first encounter with her. And I would find myself like trying to get close to her when they would fall out for chow. Like we'd line up for chow, and I'd try to kind of get around her just to kind of peep the scene a bit. Now, I feel like she hit on me first, but if you asked her, she would say that I pursued her. And she was, I did. I did in a way, right? There's a
Yep.
there's a milkshake recipe that comes into play, Nathaniel. And there I had, a milkshake recipe, a prison milkshake recipe, and, it's not even made with real ice cream, like, it's made with cold water when we would get occasionally, we would get ice cold water in there, and so I mixed all the ingredients in this packet, and I had the officer who was going around handing out cold water. She would like push a cart with a igloo, and it's Texas, so it's hot. It's like 130 degrees, so we need the cold water, right? So she's going around, and I got the officer, hey, when you go by, sell such and such, hand them this, and the officer actually took it up for me. Um, my wife will tell you that she thought it was a setup, like, she wasn't used to the laws, like, doing that, but I had been there a while, I knew who I could deal with and who I couldn't, and I just put a little note on there like, "Hey, enjoy this milkshake," and gave her the directions how to mix it with the cold water, and that's how it started, yeah.
So in other words, you owe that officer for helping you, because that officer was complicit in you flirting and getting that message across.
Yeah, I do owe that officer. So, thank you. You know who you are. I'm not gonna call you out
Yeah.
because you still work in the system, and I don't wanna get you in trouble. But
Yeah, we
yeah,
don't need to do that.
thank you for sure. And there were, we didn't live together for very long. I ended up getting moved shortly after that, like within a month. And so our relationship in prison was not based on like being physically next to each other all the time. I was on a maximum security unit. So like we didn't go to outside rec together. We didn't get to see each other a whole lot. Like across the chow hall sometimes or across the chapels sometimes. Just very rarely were we actually together. Our relationship really was like a pen pal relationship. We were passing notes back and forth and getting to know each other through the mail. And in a way, that was kind of journaling also, to have someone that you can trust with your feelings and things that you're going through in there. Because in prison, you can't really have a journal easily. I knew people that had journals that were coded and they had their own code because the laws read those. Um, the laws read them, so A, they could get you in trouble, but B, some officers, not all, because there are lots of good ones, and lots that just are there to do their job, but some will, like, read your entries out loud when they're doing the cell search and, like, throw things back in your face, so you have to be very careful what you have in writing, but if it's this note that doesn't have your name on it, but you're sending it to someone you can trust to read it. It is a form of that. So we really grew we grew really close in there. And she ended up my prison wife, which that's a term in there, like, you know, uh we wifed each other. So um there's lots of those kind of relationships, in there. I think people, are starving for connection, and to really be heard.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure that in that environment, you want to feel loved, you want to feel accepted. In large part, in the external outside world, you're not accepted anymore. You're not deemed as important or significant anymore. So you trauma bond, as you eloquently put it earlier. I want to bring up something that I thought is hilarious. You said that you would go ahead and try to be in the same proximity of her and just do small gestures just to show that you're interested. I find it funny how I would do that naturally. Like if I was interested in somebody, I would purposely try to just get myself in that general vicinity that they're in. And I find it interesting how you were able to do that despite the fact that you were behind bars. Like you were able to find the little avenues to be able to show that you're interested and still flirt and show that, hey, listen, I'm kind of digging you. I like the vibe that you're putting out there. That's awesome. That's funny. I'm glad that you were able to do that in such a stressful environment, because I think finding love is challenging in a normal environment. Finding love is hard in the outside world. In that pressurized environment where there is so much stress, there's always that feeling of looking over your shoulder. You even talked about how your wife thought that that might be a setup, because it's true. I remember you talked about in the first episode how you were in solitary confinement for giving someone a hug because you felt bad for their circumstances. So that easily could have been an easy setup that you were just trying to go ahead and, pin the law against her, but that wasn't the case. You were there for love and you found it. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Thanks for that. We actually got legally married last year. We just celebrated our 1-year wedding anniversary, and life is chaotic out here. But, I think that we faced a lot of adversity in there in regards to our relationship. And I remember very specific times that people were like, you're not going to know her in the free world, or, just because all of that, Nathanael, passing notes, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to, they don't want you to form any kind of bond, including close friendships. Like, they really try to deter you from linking up with other incarcerated people. I think they want us to feel separated and alone, so there's not like an uprising, but yeah, I think it's been a really beautiful journey with her, and really excited to see even more of where our future goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do you think that is a goal of the law, to suppress and to minimize relationships and to dilute connections? Why do you think that's a goal for them, or why do you think they do that?
I think that any authority that is trying to control a population wants to see us separated. I mean, you don't want people. You want to see people in adversity, not coming together, because you don't want them coming together against you, if that makes sense. And I think that that's part of it. The prison policies and rules are made to keep us separated. I mean, it's very clear. You can't share toothpaste in there. Like, if someone doesn't have shampoo, you can't share shampoo. Like, it legally. You do it because we're in there together and we're surviving. But the way that it's mapped out, I think, is just to leave us, feeling down. They don't want you to become the most powerful version of yourself. And we become the most powerful version of ourselves when we have community. They don't want that for you when they're over authority over you, right? So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've never been in prison, and I won't act like I ever have, but just from talking to people that have, it almost sounds like it's a pressurized version of the outside world, in the sense of, whenever you, like you said, whenever you're trying to control a mass populace of individuals, you want to be as divisive and as hateful as possible, so that way you're able to control and use that emotion against one another. When I firmly believe there's more that bridges people together than what separates us. And I think prison is a perfect example. At the baseline of it all, you're all humans. You're all people. You all have feelings. You all have families. Some more than others. Some are more engaged than others. But you all are still people. And you all still have a heart. And you all still have a brain. And to remember that, the baseline of humanity, I feel like we should amplify that more in today's society, because I think that would just solve a lot of the problems. I always think back to when I was a little kid. And when I was a little kid, I remember teachers telling me very specifically, there's people who are different than you, but you got to be friends with everyone. You got to accept everyone. You got to love everyone. And it's so sad to see that as we get older, we lose that. Now, some of that might be because of just the stresses of life. Some of that might be whatever politics you believe in, whatever the case may be. But it's very sad to see that, because that's what I grew up with, and that's what I love. I love having empathy for other people. I love when I can meet somebody where they're at and be able to uplift them. It does give me that joy. It gives me a purpose. And I really hope that whoever listens to this can hear some of these stories that you talk about, because you saw who they were, you met them where they were at, and you helped them. I remember talking on a podcast. I'm actually not sure if it was you or if it was another one, but I remember talking to someone and sharing that how I grew up. We grew up very poor, and food was very scarce, and it was challenging for us to get. And I remember sneaking food into my coat just so I can have a plate of spaghetti for dinner that night. And my mom was in the hospital. She was very sick. My stepfather was working a ton of hours, so we really had to fend for ourselves. And what's shameful is you'll hear people say, I can't believe you would do that. And to me, I'm not for that. Like, to me, it's like, I wish that store clerk who tried to chase me out recognized that I needed help and just offered that, or whatever the case may be. That would have stuck with me more than him chasing me out, threatening to kill me over overpriced spaghetti. But I remember that. He was cussing me up left and right. I think I was 16, 17 at the time. He was cursing me out, telling me the next time he saw me, he was going to shoot me where I stood. That was traumatic. I wish that I had him look at me and say, he's clearly a child that needs food, that needs help. That would have stuck with me. So all these experiences that you talk about, there's a reason why they are sticking with you now, even outside of life. Even life outside of prison. And they'll stick with you for the rest of your life and hopefully the rest of their life, because you were able to give that toothpaste, build that community, build that love that we all grew up, we all grew up believing and listening and following. And so, as I mentioned, for anybody who listens to this, I hope that you can find it within you to give and love, and just remember to be an empath. It's going to fulfill you more. It's going to fill your heart, especially during the holiday season. I think that makes people recognize more what they don't have more than what they do have, if that makes sense. And so I'm glad that we're able to have this discussion, and I hope that we can impact others in their lives as we start to go into your advocacy and the work that you do with that. After your release now, what motivated you to become an advocate for yourself and for others?
Great question. I think that as I started sharing my experiences, or just in casual conversation with my family, and seeing their sometimes shock or disbelief of things that I had normalized because I had been living that for 10 years, I started to really become acutely aware that the things that happened in there were not normal, and they weren't okay. And how has that affected me? And then also that people just genuinely didn't know. I think people, when we're incarcerated, we don't try to say a whole lot about what's happening in there. Like, there's retaliation that can happen from staff, of course. And then also, we don't want to worry our loved ones. Like, I remember even telling my mom, I'm good in here, Mom. This is like camp. I just miss everybody. Like, the punishment is just being away from y'all. Knowing that it was not that, right? Knowing that it was not some summer camp, and it didn't feel like that. But just trying to really keep my mom and stuff happy. So that kind of planted a little seed. And then my dad and my brother are musicians. They're locally well known in our town, and they have this post COVID, my parents' wedding anniversary, my brother's birthday. They have this big party, and there's hundreds of people there, lots of different musicians. I'm on the stage with my brother. I'd been home about 3 months, and we're introducing bands and bantering and having fun on the stage, and my brother saying things like, "I'm just so glad you're home for this, Marci. I'm so glad my sister can make this." And I saw that there was confusion, uh, and people didn't know what he was talking about, right? Um, and I asked my dad. I was like, "What's up?" A few days later, like, "You didn't tell people I was in prison? Like, did y'all hide that from people?" And he said, "We told our inner circle, but that's your story." And when that hit me, he's like, "Okay, that I do have a story. You're right. That is my story." And I also didn't want it to be like this elephant in the room. So I made a video of me like holding my mugshot. I posted it on TikTok because I was following a few. My daughters introduced me to TikTok, and I was already kind of following a few folks and really dipping my toes just into watching the videos. But I posted it on there, and then I put the link on my parents' Facebook page, and it was just like, this is what happens when I Googled my name, and it was my mugshot. It was just kind of a silly little video, but also just kind of breaking the ice, like, "Hey folks, I'm here, and yes, I was in prison. Yes, I committed a crime that landed me in prison, but that's not all I am. I'm here, and it's okay. Like, if you want to ask me about it, you can ask me about it. If you don't, but it doesn't have to be this secret that you talk about behind my back, basically." And from that, it just started taking off. People started asking questions, and I started answering them. And I realized very quickly that it wasn't that most of the folks out here didn't care about what happened in there. It's that they didn't know. And it felt empowering to be able to share those stories and those insights, in just a very raw, authentic way. It felt therapeutic for me. About a year later, and about 200 and something thousand followers later, I said, "Hey, I got to do something." I contacted my friend Carrie Blankinger, who was also a TikToker at the time. She's a journalist for the LA Times now, but she used to report on Texas prisons. And I said, "Hey, I need to utilize this a little bit more. Like, I'm ready to really dive in." And she connected me with some folks here in Texas, and that's kind of how it started.
So your dad saying that one line was the light bulb in your head of like, wow, I do have a story. I am valuable. I can share.
Yeah, I mean, it was he saying that planted that seed for sure, and empowered me to know that I had their support if I wanted to talk about it, or if I didn't want to talk about it, I had their support. And it there's something special about owning your own story, and I felt like at that time the state owned my story. They controlled the narrative. They're the ones who make prison look like what it looks like to the public eye. And those of us coming out, we have this opportunity to take control of that back. And we're the ones who live there 24/7. And I even tell some staff members that are like, "I don't remember this happening." And I'm like, "Yeah, you worked 4 days a week. I was there, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 10 plus years, mostly on that same unit. You really can't argue with me about things that happened on that unit during that time. Like, I was right there."
You lived it. You breathed it. You were there 24/7. Like you said, they worked 4 days a week. You were there your whole life for 10 years. Um, did your parents face any repercussions by your local community for being the parents of an incarcerated child?
I think that my parents' personality and their demeanor helped them a lot with the community because they are very loved. They're very giving people. They're kind of like a hippie mentality. They really believe in helping everybody, and so I think it takes a special person to be mean to somebody like my parents. Truly, my parents and my brother. Like, I'm probably the rotten one out of the bunch, as far as that goes, because they're just genuinely so kind-hearted. But there's still this stigma. So there were things that happened. like the shame that comes behind having a family member in prison. And I really, one of the things that I hope that some of my social media changes is that people know that this really could happen to anybody. I mean, truly, anybody could end up in prison. I was in prison for people that were doing a lot less than me and were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, truly. And then the other thing is that it affects so many families. Like, nobody talks about it, so people don't realize that you're working with people who have loved ones in prison. You're at the grocery store with people who have loved ones in prison, because it affects so many people in this country. This mass incarceration is real, and it's happening right here in our country. The United States incarcerates more people more people per capita than any other democratic country in the world. And Texas is more than a lot of countries. Of course, Texas is so big, but yeah, I mean, it's happening. And so I think the more that people talk about it, and family members talk about it, I think it's sadly, there's nothing normal about locking people in cages, but at least it will normalize that that's what's happening in our country. And we don't have to you don't have to hold your head down in shame if your brother's locked up. That's not a direct reflection on who you are or even who he is as a person. What it means is he did something. We've all done something.
Right. Like, I brought up the whole me stealing spaghetti. If they, at the risk of saying something that might be controversial, if they want to find you guilty of something, they will. They can look through your phone. They can look at the time when you sold something and didn't pay taxes, whatever the case may be. So, as you mentioned, it happens to a lot more people than we think. And so to be this pretentious, hoity-toity person that acts like you're better than everyone, or snooty, and for the people who don't know, that's my word of the day. I challenged myself. It really could happen to anybody. You're not better. You bleed red, I bleed red. You poop, I poop. Again, I go back to the things that I was taught. I remember teachers, coaches, guidance counselors saying those things to me. Not verbatim, but they used to say things like, oh, we're all humans. It doesn't matter. On the inside, we all have this. We all have this. Like, we're all humans. We're all people. We all have families. It goes back to what I said earlier. So I'm grateful to hear that your family didn't really face repercussions, because I just feel like it's so easy for folks to judge about somebody else's life. And perhaps I'm wrong, but I hear so many times where it's like, hey, aren't you the brother of this person, or aren't you the cousin of that person? And then you get casted in this net, when it's like, they made a mistake, I've made mistakes. Theirs was heightened in accordance to the law, right? And why I say that is because, and I don't want to push this down your throat, but I'm a very religious person. I believe in God. I believe that we're all equal. And I believe that just because you do something according to the law that's worse than what I do, my God says that they're the same. That's what I believe. So I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to judge somebody who has murdered somebody, who has stolen something, who has hit and run, because you said this so eloquently in our first episode. Why judge somebody on their worst day? That is so unfair. You know what I mean? It's just so unfair to judge somebody on their worst day. People are people. Life's messy. People make mistakes. So to judge somebody based off of something they did in the heat of the moment, maybe because they were afraid, whatever the case may be, it's not my place to judge. Now, the law is going to tell you this person is worse because of this. And for people who disagree with me on that, I say, I think that that's incorrect, and it's a fallacy, because if it was correct in your eyes, then there wouldn't be 20 years for this, 5 years for this. It would just be this blanket statement, which is what I believe. I believe we all make mistakes. And just because some people it's profiled and displayed to the media or brought to light, that doesn't make it any better. It really doesn't, just because what I do behind closed doors and what you do out in public, it gets more publicized. It doesn't mean that I'm better than you. It doesn't. It really doesn't. So I'm not for those people that are, judgmental about people's past. And it's hard to do it with social media. It is very hard. So I want to switch into that. You have a significant presence on TikTok. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, you'll answer questions that people will ask you about the prison system and about life in prison. How do you leverage social media to raise awareness, but also as a purge to be able to vent, to help others, but not listen to that judgment and that hatefulness? Because I'm sure it happens. It happens to everyone. So how do you leverage that?
Yeah, they do come for me in the comments, Nathaniel, lots of times. I very rarely will post something that I don't get some kind of negative feedback, and those videos that go viral can really, once it's kind of the algorithm pushes it out into not my normal audience, people are like, they really come hard. So it is a balance. First of all, I think you have to have kind of tough skin and be secure in who you are to have a social media presence. Luckily, I have a great support system with my family, with my fellow advocates, other formerly incarcerated folks that we have a community outside of prison and that have a common mission, right? So I find my personal value in those things with my family and with those folks. I also hold on to when I tell a story and somebody says, thank you. My daughter's in prison right now, and hearing you talk about making fried pickles with your friends, or hearing you talk about how you spent Thanksgiving in prison, it helps me. It helps me relate to her, and it helps me know that she can be okay too. Those kind of comments are everything, and that's what really gives me more motivation to keep going. Um, yeah, I think that just spreading awareness about all of the things that you talked about, humanity shining through and telling stories and showing things that we did in prison that were fun and silly, and making mascara out of toothpaste and ink and these kind of things. Really show how we're still people. I think that they humanize incarcerated people. And then you have to kind of throw in a mix of, okay, now we talked about the fun stuff. So every now and then you throw in a video about, hey, this happens. This happens in there. This happened to me. This is in the news, and this is what happened to me while I was in there. That's how I know this news is accurate, and kind of using that regular media in a mix with social media. Yeah.
Let's talk about that now. So you talked about community outreach. I believe you're a community outreach coordinator for the Lioness Justice Impacted Women's Alliance. What specific initiatives do you take that you're most passionate about and that you use to help bring awareness and to help those who are incarcerated or those who have been impacted by incarceration?
So organizationally, our mission statement, right, is to end the devaluing of women, girls, and gender expansive individuals within the criminal legal system here in Texas. So we really take our priorities from our inside members. We have about 500 currently incarcerated members, people doing time in women's prisons here in Texas, and they kind of lead the way. So some of our priorities include equal education opportunities for people serving time in women's prisons compared to people serving time in men's prisons. And they include conditions in confinement, like the overuse of solitary confinement, the lack of climate control in Texas prisons. They also include more dignity type of bills, like the way that women are demeaned and degraded during strip searches, and also LGBTQ rights in there. There's kind of a hierarchy of the way that people are treated inside of Texas women's prisons. And someone that looks like me, which is like a very probably cis presenting woman, white, is like at the top about how staff treats you. And then underneath that is Black and brown people. And then underneath that is any mask presenting of any race, any mask presenting woman. And then it would be just the lowest would be trans men that are housed in women's units. And that's reflected in the amount of people in solitary confinement. It's reflected. I mean, we see it every day. We lived it. We visually see it. We saw it. We didn't treat each other differently, but the staff treated us differently. And so what do we do about that now? We're working on spreading awareness about that, and challenging the system to change some policies around that.
What is masked?
Yeah.
What was that? I caught it, but I don't know what that
Yeah.
is.
So a mask presenting woman would be a woman that presents a little bit more masculine. So maybe she has her hair cut short, or maybe she walks a little hard. It's not what society has deemed maybe a woman should look like, less feminine presenting.
So you noticed, and I'm not going to discredit you because you lived it, and I think anybody who does discredit you is ignorant. So you have seen this hierarchy, in, for lack of a better terms, of who gets treated more appropriately and better, and your organization is doing its very best to eliminate that, eradicate that, and to have it be, okay, everybody gets treated equally. Is that safe to say?
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. And there's just lots of examples like that are currently happening. They've opened one of the prisons in Texas has opened a honor dorm. It's like a one dorm that is a little bit nicer than the other dorms. It has a little more amenities, if you can use that word for prison, right? But it's like couches instead of hard steel benches, and they opened up this dorm and they just took the list. It's supposed to be like, if you behave, if you're good, we're going to dangle this little treat in front of you, which means you're completely compliant even to things that you know are wrong. And that's what that means in there. But anyways, they open up this dorm, and one mask presenting woman and one trans man got randomly picked to go in the dorm. And no disciplinary histories, because the computer generated it. The computer says who is the best disciplinary, like the least disciplinary cases. So the computer generates this list. They pull the people in the dorm, and within the first week, one of those folks was just moved for no reason out of the dorm. And then the next week, the warden actually spotted the mask presenting woman in line and pill line with that dorm, and she said, "You're out of place. I know this dorm." And that lady got a moving pass. So it's very obvious. They don't really even try to hide.
Another question I want to ask. So you notice, I'm assuming from either your experience and talking with men that have been in prison, so you notice that there's more opportunities for men to make advancements in life afterwards than women?
Yeah, and that's not even just from observation or from conversation. That's actually what the state provides as far as training. For men, they offer several training and certifications that offer career pathways. When they get out of prison, they can get out of prison with certifications that get them jobs that are not offered to women. Additionally, the higher education, the discrepancies is huge. There's not a master's program for incarcerated women. For example, I got my associate's degree while I was incarcerated and could never move past that because they just offer the same classes over and over to the women. And we see men, the percentage of coming out with bachelor's degree and higher in comparison to where we're just kind of stuck. I even have one of our our board members for Lioness Justice Impacted Women's Alliance. She tells a story. She did 20 years, and she got her higher education inside as well. And she was told, when she asked about the master's program, she was told that she didn't need a master's degree because she was a woman. We're in Texas, and there's still a lot of that thinking, and we're working to dismantle that inside of the Texas prison system for sure.
So is it safe to say, and I know that there's a lot of trigger words and there's a lot of words that get floated around on the internet, but they're used incorrectly. Would you say that one of the biggest things that your organization is trying to eliminate is the overall misogyny of incarcerations and how women in particular are treated in prison and afterwards?
Yeah, so yes, some of the misogyny for sure. Also, just that prisons were built to hold men. The system was built for men, and so the policies and things that are required to effectively run a men's prison are not the same for women, but it's treated across the board. And then there's just kind of this underlying tone of women who are incarcerated are particularly, I think, we're demonized in a way. Men, well, they made this mistake or they did this thing. You're not a bad dad if you went to prison. But if you're a mom who went to prison, I think that there's this higher stigma on it. I think that comes from staff as well. Women, incarcerated women, are over disciplined. We get in trouble for a lot of things that the guys don't get in trouble, but we're also not like really making shanks and starting riots. So I think in men's prisons, they let them deal with a lot more silly things like hanging your wet clothes. Men have lines all over clotheslines to hang their wet clothes. That's a big deal in women's prisons. It's just little things like that.
Like, you can't do that in a woman's
No,
prison.
absolutely not. And it's a rule for both prisons, but the staff in the men's prisons are not going to care about somebody's wet towel hanging up. But in a woman's prison, it is. In a woman's prison, if we have a hair tie holding our instant coffee bag closed, technically that's contraband because you're using your hair tie for something that it's not intended to use. But in a men's prison, they have a free world rubber band around theirs, and that just comes from me speaking with people who have done time in men's prisons. They're not getting cased up or in trouble for the kind of things that women are getting in trouble for.
Yeah. Now, I'm not defending these guards or why they act this way or that way. I'm just having a conversation and asking a question here. Do you think that a big reason as to why they may be apprehensive to discipline the men more so than the women is because they're afraid of inciting that violence and getting that knee-jerk emotional reaction that would be more towards a violent reaction as opposed of them not being as fearful as a woman being as confrontational?
Yeah, I think that definitely has something to do with it. Men have they have a history. Incarcerated men have a history of more of an uprising and more violent behavior, and so for sure there is a fear of that. And for sure, the guys locked up. I've been on the phone with men that are locked up, and they're like, "Oh, we just didn't rack up." Like it's like midnight and they're in the day room. And I'm like, "What do you mean you didn't go to your cell?" He's like, "No, we decided we weren't doing that." Well, what are they going to do when everybody decides they're not going to do that? See what I'm saying? So women don't really, that's not our reaction to things, is not immediately aggressive.
So to make it more lighthearted, you're effectively saying women are better rule followers and listeners than us men. No, I admit, as a man sometimes we hear, but we don't listen. Again, just trying to make it lighthearted, but I do understand that you're right. It could be a situation that these officers don't want to find themselves in, where it's like you have 40 men, you're outnumbered, clearly, and essentially you can make a mini army if you try to combat that and argue enough. Whereas women, the forefront of your mind isn't that violence, isn't that confrontation. It might be you advocating and defending yourself, but I just think intrinsically women, their first mindset is not, let me resort to violence to handle this problem. And I'm not saying all men are like that, but it's obviously more common for a guy to go ahead and stand on that hill and die on that hill for something that they don't need to. Whereas a woman goes, this isn't something I want to deal with. I'll fight another day type of deal. Or I'll handle it when it's the more appropriate time. In my opinion, that's what I find. And again, I can only speak from the male's perspective. There's been times where, sometimes you have a dispute and you're like, man, I'm willing to die on this hill. Even though you're wrong, but you're willing to. And I find that a lot of times it's the women, the strong women that are behind that man, that man that'll be like, babe, this isn't something that you should really be fighting over. This is something you can let go. And so it's just something I notice as a man, because again, I can only speak from that perspective.
Yeah, I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert on what happens inside of men's prisons, but I am in contact with a lot of incarcerated men and have this community of formerly incarcerated men. And I just know when we get together, our stories are so dramatically different. And a lot of times we shock them with things that we went through, and they're just like, this is just doesn't make sense. But also there wasn't this like, I didn't go to sleep at night. I didn't go to sleep at night worrying about the people around me or random acts of violence. And there wasn't any kind of Texas men's prisons are very segregated, gang related, and demographic related. And women's prisons just aren't. There was no fear of that. We all were in there together, and our play families, they were made up of like I said, all different races, ages, demographics. It didn't matter if you were from H-Town or Dallas or, none of that mattered. It just mattered that we were there together. And I think men's just operated very differently.
Yeah. What are some misconceptions about women in prison that you wish more people understood?
The idea that mothers, especially, that end up incarcerated, I think there's this belief that they don't love their kids. If they cared about their kids, they wouldn't do this, or they wouldn't have ended up there. And two things can be true at once. A woman can love her kids with all of her soul and all of her being, and she can make a bad choice that lands her in prison. Both of those things can be true at once. They're not one or the other. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is that most of the women that I was incarcerated with had experienced some kind of very traumatic upbringing or happenings in their life that had never been dealt with. The percentage of women period, who are victims of sexual assault is huge anyways, but in prison, it's even more concentrated. I remember being in a chapel service one time, and the chapel was full. I think it holds about 600 people. So I'm just going to guesstimate that it was about 600 incarcerated women in there. And the lady says, she's talking real about her experience. And she just says, who in here has been a victim? And it was like before you were 10, a victim of sexual assault, before you were 20. But when I tell you that everybody's hands, I felt like 97% easily of those hands were in the air. And these are things that we're not really realizing. Our society is not coming together as a community and helping people before they get on that path to prison. And it's just hurting people experiencing trauma, then inflicting trauma on others, and then ending up in prison and having more trauma inflicted on them. And there's no healing. And at some point, if we don't come together and start helping people and really restoring what is broken within them, it's just the cycle continues on and on. And I think I'm so grateful for organizations like Lioness and others that are just doing good work to really hands-on helping people coming out of prison, hands-on giving them a safe landing space and a space to heal, you know.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. You talked earlier about some of the systemic changes that you want to make and that your organization is trying to advocate for and fight for. How do you see the role of social media and a digital platform, much like yours, in evolving for the fight for those social changes?
Social media is such a huge tool in advocacy and making societal changes. What we know about the younger generations, a lot of them get 100% of their news from social media, and so that's very real. It's very important what we say and what we put out there. So I think it's huge. I didn't expect to be able to just kind of jump into this social media realm and this digital world and utilize it in such a positive way. I mean, I got locked up and Facebook was barely a thing, and I come out and here I am launched into this social media world. But it's hugely effective. The power of storytelling and the power of narrative is incredibly powerful in making big changes, not just in the way we think, but in getting people really to act on their what they've learned, right?
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. Before we end with some burning questions, I want to ask you a question. Might be a loaded question, but I'm going to ask it. Is there anything that I didn't bring up or anything that you want to touch up on about your organization or about your advocacy work that you really want the listeners and the viewers to really hold on to and value and take with them for the rest of their lives? Is there anything, some closing thoughts that you want to share about your advocacy or some of the work that you do within your organizations?
I would say that advocacy doesn't necessarily have to mean starting this nonprofit, and it doesn't necessarily mean marching at the Capitol. It starts with conversations just like you and I are having. It starts with, if you've heard something in my story or other people's stories that really hit home, you share those. It starts with conversations with your own family, with your own community, and it starts with spreading awareness. So I think that everybody has the power to be an advocate for things that they believe in. And you are probably already unknowingly advocating for some things that you believe in. But it starts there.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's wrap up with some burning questions then. What is something you've always wanted to try, but you have not yet tried?
Skydiving. I actually bought my mom a skydiving pass on Groupon last year for Mother's Day, and life happened and we didn't get to go. It expired, and she wants to also. So we're going to have to do that again.
Yes, yes. Hopefully after you're healed, for sure.
Yes.
What's your favorite way to unwind after a long day?
I have a hard time unwinding. I feel like between my regular work and social media, I'm always on my phone. So I like to set the phone off. We veg out watching whatever. Right now, we're watching Prison Break. So, what is that, like Netflix and chill? That's probably my unwind, because we get on one show and try to watch that same show for every night. After the kids go to bed, we'll watch one episode.
So it's so funny that you brought up Prison Break, because I grew up watching that on Fox when it was the weekly episodic, not the Netflix where you can just watch the whole series. I remember watching it and needing to wait a whole week. And the one thing I love and hate about that show at the same time is every episode ends with a
Yes.
cliffhanger. Like, come on. Like, no, no, no. But I love that show. And admittedly, every time I asked you questions about prison or anything like that, that's the only thing that came to my mind. I don't know why that show. Maybe it's because it's one of the more successful shows where the main characters and even the good guys, the guys that you want to win, are cons. Or they're convicts, right? Right? If you really think about it, you want them to win. You want them to succeed. It's a very interesting show. It's a very fascinating show. I recommend anybody give it a watch. I remember watching it, as I mentioned, 15 years ago at this point, and loving every single episode of that show. And even just the character arcs of the people. I don't want to spoil too much, but I remember despising that prison guard, Brad. That's his name,
Yes.
Brad. Despise. I hated Brad, that little son of a bitch. I wanted to personally beat the shit out of him. And then, towards the end, I don't want to spoil it, he becomes this hero that you absolutely love. And you can't get it out of your head. You love him. I love how they did that, how they were able to make me hate a guy so much. But then by the end of it, I truly, truly loved him. And he ended up being one of my favorite characters. And, you know, at the risk of embarrassing myself, I remember tearing up as a youngster watching that and seeing what happened to him. And I was like, oh, no, not Brad, not Brad. Just, he was a hero at the end of it. But I guess one of the beautiful things is even just you and I in this exchange that we're having, this robust exchange, is that like anything in life, you can't judge people on their worst days, right? And Brad had a lot of bad days that I really, really hated. I really hated. But it's who you end up being, not what you did during your mistakes. And I think that that's what a lot of people need to focus on. I love that we're able to go into this discussion about that during the burning questions. That's awesome. I love it. If there's one movie that you could watch for the rest of your life, you can't watch any other movie, what would it be?
Top Gun.
Yes.
I watched Top Gun a million times growing up, and I've watched a million times since I've been home. So
Yeah. Such a good movie. Such a great movie. What's one piece of advice that you'd give to someone who doesn't exactly know where to start?
stop worrying about what other people think, and you don't have to change what you say or what you do based on other people. Just be true to yourself. Can I add more? It's okay to say no. You don't have to say yes to everything. It's okay to say no, and you don't have to give people a reason. If you just don't want to do something, you can just say no, and that's okay.
Yes. Yes. The power of a no. And I don't know why. I think sometimes people take no as a negative connotation, but a lot of times it can be positive for you. And I think that more people need to focus on that. I'll ask this one last thing. It's a chat pack. I'm going to randomly pull out a question in the chat
Okay.
pack, and we'll see what you get, and then you got to answer the chat pack question. All right. If you could design a new ride or attraction at Disney World, what would it be?
What an interesting question.
Yes, I got this. I got this at a garage sale for like 25
That's
cents.
great. That's
Best.
great. A ride or attraction. Um, I don't know, maybe some kind of underground roller coaster, like an underground cave
Ooh.
thing. I don't know.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. Are you a roller coaster person? I know you said you wanted to skydive. Do you like roller
Love
coasters?
them. Yes,
Yes.
love them.
Yes. Me too. Me too. As I'm getting older, though, I realize my invincibility has decreased. I remember when I was even just 12 years younger, I could go bouncing from one ride to the next, to the next, to the next, and be completely fine. Now, let's just say I drag my feet a little bit from when I go from one to the other. just so I can have that recuperation.
Yeah. I still feel like I can handle everything and then really deeply regret it the next day.
Yes, you're better than me in more ways than one. I appreciate you. Marci, thank you once again so much for doing this part 2. It's everything I wanted and imagined and believed that it could be. I really appreciate you once again for taking time out of your busy schedule, sitting down, talking with me, being so authentic, so real. I know I said this to you in the last episode, and I'll say it again. I believe that you are such a strong person. You have so much to give to this world. I'm so glad that this world has you to share the stories and experiences that you have gone through, so that way you can help. Your empathy for others, your kindness, your compassion, and your overall care. And I really appreciate you for once again sacrificing time out of your busy schedule to joining me and doing this podcast. You are forever a friend of the Reyes Reflection. And I will have to send over a shirt to you, because that is what I do. You know, if you're a 2-time guest, you get a shirt. It's kind of like the SNL jacket. You get a Reyes Reflection shirt, and I'll have to send one out to you. So thank you so much again for doing this.
Nice. I would love that. And it has been a true pleasure. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Where can people find you, follow you, all that stuff? Plug yourself in real quick.
Yeah, on the Rec-Yard Women's Prison Podcast. You can Google that up, and you can find me on social media. I'm through my website, www.marcimarie.com.
Please, folks, please follow her. Please stay up to date with everything she's doing. She's a fantastic person. You will not regret it. Thank you so much for tuning in to this fantastic episode of the Reyes Reflection Podcast. Don't forget to follow me on those socials at I'm Nathanael Reyes. Share the podcast, and it's the holiday season, so if you can, check out the wonderful deals at Mad Rabbit Tattoo Aftercare, Jocko Fuel, SMACKIN Sunflower Seeds, and of course, ARAVE Cards. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. That is going to do it for this episode of the Reyes Reflection Podcast. And as always, may you live, may you love, and may you thrive. I'm Oprah, and I love you all.